In this video, I'm going to show you how to sew a really simple spaghetti strap dress. I'm going to sew this dress with a slight A-line so it can be worn day or night, and it's going to have a nice curve to the front of the dress as well. For this project, you're going to need measuring tape, scissors, pins, thread, and a stretch fabric. I used a cotton jersey. We're going to start by taking all of our measurements. We're going to measure the bust, the measurement from the bust to the waist, the large hip measurement, the length, and the measurement from the bust to the large hips. And then we're going to take all the same measurements for the back of the dress as well. For both the front and the back large hip measurements, I'm going to add an extra 3 centimeters on either side to create that A-line shape that I'm going for. The more measurements you take, the more exact you can be when you're placing your pins on your fabric. If you don't have a mannequin, you can absolutely take all of these measurements on yourself. A little trick when measuring on yourself, you can use the clothes that you're wearing as a guide and measure from side seam to side seam. Then we're going to write down all the measurements that we made and create a little map of what the dress is going to look like. And then we're ready to pin these measurements down onto our fabric, starting with the front of the dress. So I'm just going to use my measuring tape and my pins to mark out all the measurements. And then I'm creating smooth lines in between my measurements with my pins. After this, I'm going to have the full outline of the dress. Then I can cut this piece out, leaving at least 1 centimeter extra for seam allowance. I left a little more than that for some leeway. And then for the hem, I left an extra 5 centimeters to play around with. I marked out where my center was, so I just then folded it in half and continued to cut to make sure that I got the exact mirror image for the other side. My back measurements were similar to my front, so when creating the back piece, I just cut out the front piece again and made it a little lower in the back. I was using scrap fabric, so I had to get a little creative with the direction of my piece, which I don't recommend because it changes the direction of the stretch in the fabric. Now I'm just going to pin the front and the back piece together, right sides together at the side seams. And as you can see, my front and back piece are the same, my back piece just starts a little lower. You can do this pinning on yourself as well, and you can make any adjustments now to the side seams. The main thing at this phase is you can't have it too tight that you can't take it off, because we're not going to be adding any zippers. And now you're ready to sew your side seams with a zigzag stitch. And then when you're done, you can cut away any of the extra fabric on the side seams. Now putting the dress on, you're going to place pins and create the shape of the neckline that you want. Then you're also going to place pins to take that neckline down so it matches up with the back of the dress. Then with our measuring tape, we're going to take 2 measurements. One, the front of the neckline, and the second measurement is going to be the straps, which is going to wrap around the back of the dress all the way around, up to the front, and back down as the second strap. With these 2 measurements, we're going to create 1, a bias strip, and 2, a bias strip that also then turns into the straps. So we're going to cut out a strip in each of those measurements, and both of them are going to be 5 centimeters in width. If your fabric isn't long enough, you can cut out 2 pieces and attach them together. For me, my fabric wasn't long enough, so I had to cut out 2 strips and attach them together to create the longer measurement. With my 2 strips of fabric cut, I can now cut the neckline. So that's just cutting around the pins that I placed for my neckline. If you made any adjustments to the shape of the back of the dress, you can trim away that fabric as well. We're going to start by placing the shorter bias strip right sides together on the front of our dress. It's important to start with the front piece because we want this piece to lie under our second bias strip, which I'll show you in the next step. And then we're going to sew where we pinned with a zigzag stitch. And then I like to trim away any of the excess seam allowance to reduce any bulk. Then we're going to iron our seam allowance towards the strip of fabric. Then we're going to fold our strip over so it hits the seam allowance and iron that down. Then we're going to fold that over a second time, locking in all the raw edges and ironing that down. And then we're going to place pins in the seam and lock down that folded over fabric on the other side. So the pins should be right in the seam and catching the fabric that's folded over on the other side. And then with a straight stitch, we're going to sew where we placed our pins right on the seam. Now we've finished the neckline and our first bias strip. Now we're going to move on to the second and longer bias strip, which I'm going to start by sewing my two pieces together and cutting away that extra seam allowance. Placing the right side of my bias strip to the right side of the dress, I like to start at the back center of my dress. And I'm just going to pin this strip all along the edge of my dress from the back up until the front neckline. And I'm going to pin it right over top the first bias strip. And then with a zigzag stitch, we're going to sew where we pinned. And then again, trimming away the excess fabric to reduce bulk. It's going to be the exact same process as the first bias strip. We're just going to have two straps on either end. We're going to start by folding over our fabric 1 centimeter on the strap and then continuing to iron down the seam allowance towards the bias strip. I decided I wanted a thinner strap, so I'm going to trim away 2 centimeters from my strip. Then I'm going to continue to fold as normal, having the edges meet in the center, ironing that down, and then folding it in half again. It's the exact same process that we did with the first bias strip, it's just that this end isn't connected to the dress. And then we're going to continue to do the same process all along the entire strip, placing pins as we go. And here I'm just showing you what it looks like when the strap then meets the dress. And you're just going to continue to place the pins. If you want a thicker strap, you can also leave your width at 5 centimeters and not trim away the 2 centimeters like I did. It's really important to use pins and iron at this step. And then you're just going to sew along where you pinned, using a straight stitch. Putting the dress on yourself or a mannequin, you're going to decide where you want the straps to hit in the back and place pins to mark that out. And then we're also going to cut out the length that we want for the dress, leaving 3 centimeters for seam allowance. And then before we sew, we're going to just move to our ironing board and do a basic hem, folding our fabric over twice. Once that's all pinned down, we can move to our sewing machine and sew this with a straight stitch. And sew down our straps as well. For the straps, I like to do a zigzag stitch, but you can do any stitch that you like. And you're all done! Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked this video, please subscribe.